I'm going to show you how to quickly and easily set up Microsoft Purview data loss prevention. I've got my client Charlotte with me today. Charlotte is a head of a recruitment firm that I work with, and she has this new client with really strict cybersecurity requirements. Charlotte, could you tell us about what your requirements are?
Matt, I've got this client called Wonka Financial Services, and they just keep raising the bar with their cybersecurity requirements. They want me to block their data from being shared via email or through Microsoft 365 and only use their X-File transfer portal.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte. That will make sense. So the good news is we can actually do all of that using your existing Microsoft 365 Business Premium license. So this includes data loss prevention capabilities for SharePoint, Teams, and Microsoft OneDrive. If you needed to extend that protection to other cloud apps or your device, then you would need an E5 license and potentially further add-ons. So as always, we're going to go to m365.cloud.microsoft and then click on Admin on the left-hand side. If we click on Show All and under Admin Centers, we're looking for Microsoft Purview. So we've got a few different options here, and the first thing we want to do before we set up our data loss prevention policy is actually define our custom information type, because we want it to look for particular keywords relating to your client. So let's click on Information Protection and then Classifiers. Now we've got a couple of options here. You've got trainable classifiers at the top, which uses AI and machine learning to understand more about your sensitive information type, but that is not included in the Business Premium subscription. You would need an E5 subscription for that. So we're just going to look at defining specific keywords to be detected in our files or emails, and that is done using sensitive info types. So let's click on this. And we can see we've got tons of predefined information types here, like passport numbers, financial information, like credit card information. So if you're looking to detect or block anything like that, then all of that is already predefined. But in this case, because we're looking for keywords for a specific client, we want to create our own sensitive info type. So I'd encourage you to come up with some kind of naming convention. So this is going to be a client. So if we just call it client dash, and that way when we search through our sensitive info types, we're going to see everything that's relating to a specific client grouped together. So your client is Wonka Financial Services and keywords relating to Wonka Financial Services. Okay, so let's click on Next. And we need to create a pattern, and we've got this confidence level here. So usually I would encourage you setting this to high. This is how confident it is that the document or email that it's looking at is a match to this policy or pattern. So for primary element, we're going to select a keyword list, and let's give this a name. And you've got the option to use case insensitive or case sensitive terms. So in this case, we don't want it to be case sensitive. So we're going to go with Wonka Financial Services, WFS, Wonka Financial, Wonka Services. And you want to think, does that client have any other trading names? Because if they do, you want to define them here. It would be a good idea to actually talk to that client to understand what kind of keywords you might expect to see in their document, especially if there's a new client that you don't normally work with. At the bottom here, you can see we've got the option of word match or string match. If it's a string match, then that requires a full match of the entire string. So we're separating these onto different lines. Any one of these can be a match, whichever one you pick. But if you go with word match, then it will match any one of the words in these strings. So good idea to use string match in this case, because we don't want the word financial or services triggering a data loss prevention policy match. If this particular client is always using some kind of ID number in their documents, or you stamp all their documents with an ID number for that client, you could also use that here, or you could use that instead, because it would be a much more accurate way of detecting those files. But if not everything is going to contain that ID value or reference number, then you should still define some keywords in addition. So we can add another keyword group here, but I'm just going to click Done. And we've got a few options here. So the first option here is you can say that you only want to flag that file as a match to the pattern if the keywords are contained in the first 300 characters. So we can obviously change that, or we can set anywhere in the document, which I'm going to do in this case. You've then got supporting elements. So for example, if it must contain another set of keywords or a ID number or reference number in addition to one of these keywords, then we can add some supporting elements. And we've also got some additional checks that we can add here. So if we want to exclude specific values, or say that the file must include a certain prefix or suffix, or a few other options that we've got here, then we can do, but I don't need to do that in this case. So I'm just going to click Create, Next, and create my sensitive info type. And now if we search for client, we can see all of our client sensitive info types that we've defined. So on the left-hand side, let's click on data loss prevention, and let's click on policies. So we're going to create our first policy by clicking on create policy. Now we've got a couple of options here. One of the options is data in browser network activity, and you can use that to detect things like people entering information into ChatGPT. But in this case, Charlotte has specified data in Microsoft 365. So we're going to click on data stored in connected sources and click on next. And we're going to click on custom. But I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of predefined categories here. So if you wanted to detect medical information, financial information, or privacy, so personally identifiable information, then you can use the predefined categories here. But we want to go with our custom policy because we've defined our own custom keywords. So let's click on next, and let's give this a name. It's a good idea to enter a custom description which explains exactly what the policy does. So when someone comes back to this in the future, they know exactly how this has been set up, or at least what it's supposed to be doing if you've gone wrong. Assign admin units requires you to have an E5 license, and this allows you to only set this policy to apply to specific users or specific groups. So we can't do that in this case, but it doesn't matter because you want to apply this to your whole organization anyway. And we can now set which locations should be included in the policy. So we've got Microsoft 365 Copilots. We've got on-premises data repository. So if you've got an on-prem file server and you've set up a hybrid Microsoft 365 environment connected to your on-prem AD environment, then you can use on-premise repositories here. But we're setting up quite a simple policy today. So I'm going to tick all 4 of these options in one policy, and we can actually click edit on the right-hand side if we wanted to exclude specific groups of people from certain locations. So one example is you might have a finance team that is emailing files that contain a list of all of your clients to an accountant with different financial data. Your client isn't really concerned about that kind of data being shared, so you might want to add an exception to say that actually the finance team can share files via email or via SharePoint or Teams relating to that client. So we click edit and add our specific groups here to exclude them, and just select included groups, accounts, and let's click on done. Let's click on next, next again. So let's create our rule. The rule we want to create is block sharing via Microsoft 365 because we've ticked all of the locations there. So we click add condition, and content is shared from Microsoft 365 is our first condition. And it says here, detect when content is shared in email message, Teams chats, a channel message, or shared via SharePoint in a OneDrive document, because those are the different locations that we have sent. So the first option here is that it's going to detect when it's shared with people inside my organization. Our client is only concerned with us doing this for people outside of the organization. So let's click on this option, and we can again see here this only applies to content shared from Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams. So if you don't see the location here that you were hoping to include in the policy, you need to go back because you haven't set something up properly. Now, the next thing we want to do, and really important that you don't forget to actually add your sensitive information type, because otherwise you're going to find everything is getting blocked when you try to share it outside of the organization. So let's click another condition and click content contains. And where it says add here, we want to select sensitive info types, and let's type in client to find our client sensitive info types. And here is Wonka Financial Services. So I can now add that. And we can define the confidence level here. So I mentioned earlier, I'd recommend leaving this as high confidence to avoid too many false positives. You can come back and change this if you find actually it's not picking up on enough things. And instance count, so that's how many times it detects one of those keywords or keyword strings in a document or email. And we want to go with 1. And you can add further conditions if you need to. So if you want other things to be detected, then we can do. So as an example, if you are using sensitivity labels in Microsoft 365, then you can say the document must also be at a certain sensitivity label. I'll do another video on this in due course, so please subscribe to the channel if you're interested in that topic. We now move on to actions. So what actions are we going to apply when the conditions have been met? So when we see someone try to share a file or an email outside of the organization or a Teams message containing one of these keywords, what do we want it to do? So add an action, and we're going to say restrict access or encrypt the content in Microsoft 365 locations. And we want to block people from outside of the organization from accessing it. So block people from receiving an email, accessing shared content via SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams. We don't want to block everyone because that's going to block people inside the organization. And we just want to block people outside the organization in this case. And at the bottom here, we've got use notifications to inform them and help educate them. That's going to be pretty useful because otherwise they're not going to know what's going on, and your IT are going to get flooded with people saying, hey, this is being blocked, I don't know why. So let's use notifications, and we want to notify the user who sent, shared, or last modified the content. And we can also attach matching email message to the notification, which it says here only applies to Exchange. If you want to customize the policy text, then you can. So we can tick that and say, hey, it's not allowed to share this particular client's data via SharePoint, Teams, or OneDrive. You must use this other specific portal. So that would be really useful so they know actually how they can share the information if you're blocking it. So I've created a custom message to say we only use X transfer for this Wonka Financial Services client, and they can contact Help Desk for support if they don't have an account. We've then got the option to allowed overrides. So use this with caution. You should only do this if you're happy to allow the end user to say that actually I know this is allowed because of some business justified reason. Otherwise, you need to leave that unchecked if you simply want to block them and not allow them to share it. But I'm going to tick this box just to show you, and we've got an option here to say we can override the rule automatically if they say it was a false positive, or we can require business justification to override. So that will give them a little pop-up box, and they'll have to just explain why they've got justification to do this. And that is then going to get logged in the Microsoft Purview portal and sent to anyone that's configured to receive email notifications about these policy matches. So if you just want this policy to monitor what's going on rather than block it, then this is the way to go. But I'm going to uncheck that, and I just want to completely block it. And we've got an option to send alert to admins when a rule matches. We can turn that on or off depending on whether you want that. And also we have got options to send alerts to other specific people. So if you've got a compliance team, it's going to be worth creating a mailbox for these. You could create a data loss prevention alerts shared mailbox and send the alerts to that shared mailbox so that they can be centrally managed and reviewed by the compliance team. And you can also use email incident reports to notify you when there's a policy match, and that will include more detailed information. And again, you can add or remove specific people or mailboxes here. If we scroll down, we can define what type of information that we're going to include in that incident report. So that's pretty helpful to save them having to go and log into the Purview portal. And finally, at the bottom, we've got the option to evaluate the rule per component. So what that does is, rather than looking at everything collectively to see if all these conditions matched, it will look at the email body as one item and then each attachment. So if you require multiple conditions to be matched, like the file is a certain sensitivity label and contains a certain keyword, if one file only contains one of those things, then and you've selected this, then it's not going to be a match because it's going to look at everything as an individual item. Whereas if we turn that on and the email has a sensitivity label that matches, and one of the files contains those keywords, then because it's looking at everything collectively, then it will consider that to be a match. So I'm going to turn that on in this case. So if we've got multiple conflicting policies, this will be where we define which policy is king in this case. So let's click save and let's just review that. So we are blocking content that is shared via Microsoft 365 with people outside of my organization if it contains a sensitive keyword match from Wonka Financial Services, and it's going to look at messages and attachments individually. We're going to notify users with email and policy tips so they know what's going on. We're going to completely block it. So we're not allowing them to override it in this case, and we're sending reports to the administrator, and we're evaluating that rule per component. So I'm happy with that. We can turn that on or off for now. If we want to come in here and turn those rules off, we can add further rules here under this particular client if there were multiple rules we wanted to define. Otherwise, let's click on next, and then we've got a few options here. So I'd really encourage you to start by running the policy in simulation mode, because then you can just monitor and see what's going on without actually blocking anything. What you don't want to do is make a huge mistake and realize that actually loads of your files contain Wonka Financial Services because you've got all of these all client lists that are being shared everywhere, and suddenly everything's being blocked, or you've made a mistake in one of these policies. And again, you're blocking things unintentionally, you will not be popular. So I'd really encourage you to start by running it in simulation mode, monitor it, see how it's going, and then when you're happy with how it's working, once everything's fine-tuned, at that point you can then enable it. Okay, so when we do this, we can say, do we want to show policy tips while it's in simulation mode? So will the end user get a pop-up saying they shouldn't be doing this? That's probably a good idea. And do we want to just automatically turn this policy on in 15 days if it's not been edited in that time? So that covers you if you think you're going to forget to actually turn this on, but only 15 days is enough time for you to review the data and make sure this is working. So let's do that and click on next and then submit. And my policy is now created. And now on the left-hand side, to actually look at alerts, we want to click on alerts. And I can see there's no alerts here. You can set a specific time frame, you can filter different users, alert status or alert severity. And when you get an alert here, you simply click on it and you can review that alert and close it once you have reviewed it and dealt with it. Now, if we go back to policies, before you start testing this, we need to wait until the policy has finished syncing. So at the moment, if I refresh that, I can see this policy is still syncing. Once that has finished syncing, we can then do a simple test. Why don't you create a SharePoint file or a OneDrive file, or send an email with an attachment and containing one of those keywords and meeting any other conditions that you've defined, and then share it outside of the organization. See what the end user experience is. They should be getting those policy tips, and you should get a data loss prevention alert triggered in this portal. I hope you found this video useful, and if you did, please subscribe for more content like this and drop a comment with your own experiences.